Are you awake?
Yes, we are.
Are you still alive? Okay, good to hear. First off, thank you for having me here. I understand that you've had a fairly content-packed agenda so far. I got here at the end of the last session, and I got to say, I mean, that was the who's who of testing. So to come up after the founding fathers is slightly intimidating, and won't be nearly as content-packed as those guys. I think if we take a step back, the intention for today's presentation is actually a little bit different. We're going to talk about Maybank. We're going to talk about a very Malaysian experience and a Malaysian experience that's gone to the region. And it won't be as heavy on the testing component, but instead we're going to take a step back and look at a transformation journey of the bank, look at a transformation journey of the IT capability of the bank on a regional basis. And what we're going to try to do today is give you a feel for what we went through, the good parts and also some of the challenges, and get a bit beyond the motherhood statements. Because I think all of you have read case studies before. So you've seen how many ever a dozen case studies. And the case studies are good, but I'm going to try and take you a little bit deeper and go a little bit under the hood of the Maybank transformation journey, so that you can get a feel for some of the challenges we had, how we dealt with them effectively, and some how we dealt with maybe not so effectively, so you can use those as learning points going forward should you be in a similar type of program. So with that, the agenda is in four main parts. I'm going to also try and incorporate some stories. So I'll try not to speak strictly off the slides, but incorporate some stories of what we went through to try and keep you awake in your last couple sessions of the day. For those of you who aren't familiar, I'll paint a bit of context on Maybank to start. So Maybank is now 52 years old. It's the largest company on the KLSE, for largest listed company in Malaysia. I'll talk to you a bit about size later. We're about 30 million customers. We have over 2,200 branches, and we're in 20 countries. So this next slide, most people don't realize this. We actually have a very large network. So all 10 ASEAN countries. One we don't have a banking presence in yet is Thailand, but we do have Thailand's largest broking business, and we're in 10 other countries. So by comparison, when we look at regional banks, here's one of our best kept secrets. These we like Harvey balls at Maybank. So what you can see there is the 10 ASEAN countries, because we're an ASEAN bank. And you can see on the third line there is Maybank. And we're the only bank in the region, we're comparing to the big boys, the DBSs, the UOBs, that have a presence in every single country. Now that won't stay that way forever, but it's one of the elements that Maybank needs to be a bit louder about, is we've actually already built up a regional presence. Now in terms of our transformation journey, this morning, you had the pleasure of listening to our ex-CEO, Dato' Sri Wahid. So some of you know him. He was at the start of the far left here. He actually kicked off the transformation program. So Dato' Sri Wahid came to us in 2008. And at that point, Maybank was losing leadership in just about every segment. Other banks, namely CIMB and Public Bank, were catching us. A number of regional competitors were also catching us. And we launched the transformation program called Leap 30. And that was really about transforming the bank from a business angle first. So we launched the transformation program, we got traction, and then we moved to the next phase, which was converging on shared aspirations. And in that stage, we launched the IT transformation. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time today talking about the IT transformation and how that fits into the overall transformation of the bank group. And lastly, there's 2015 and beyond, and that's where we're looking now at how do we take it to the next level. As we're fairly confident on our 2015 goals. What are we going to be in 2020? So if I go to ETS, that's the area that we deal in, and it houses IT operations and service quality. We also had a transformation journey. And the first stage of it was about enabling the group. And what I call hygiene is we had to fix the basics, and we had to get the basics working. The second stage was the continued focus on delivery. And really this was to where we started to build. So first we focused on run the bank. The second stage was really on build the bank and building out the regional platforms. And then 2014, you can see there is achieving technology and operational excellence. So in terms of the IT transformation program, it's a big, very bold program for a bank where we're looking at investment dollars that surpass 1 billion ringgit by quite some ways, and about building an IT platform for a regional bank. Now, I'm going to go into some details on how we set this up and how we got it underway and some of the mistakes we made. But the three things we look at are dominance in distribution, looking at our customer base, and then the ability to develop products quickly. Now, those are pretty motherhood. We're going to take it and drill down a few levels on that. The program, at a glance, you can see there's many stages. This one shows you where we are in 2013. When we started, quite frankly, we are an organization that at that point had outsourced most of our capability. We outsourced our infrastructure in 2003. We'd outsourced a lot of our dev capability to the vendors, and we were really in a situation where we were starting to rebuild the whole internal capability of the bank, not just in Malaysia, but across the group. So we started from basics. We really took a step back, and we did something we'd never done before, is we looked at how were we going to build our enterprise architecture, and how were we going to put together a regional roadmap. And you might find it surprising that to say, oh, Maybank didn't have an enterprise architecture. And we had one of sorts. I mean, there was a few of them floating around in the IT department, but there wasn't one that anchored the group that all parties were aligned behind. And definitely we then didn't have a roadmap that was based on the enterprise architecture in terms of the timing of delivery of capability to the businesses. So you can see on this chart here, we started up in the left-hand corner identifying our strategic imperatives, our design principles, and then our essential advantage. And I'll talk a bit about essential advantage to come up with the enterprise architecture. Then along the bottom, you can see our EA principles leading into the other processes to come up with the regional roadmap. Now, the essential advantages. When we started the ITTP, we took a step back and we decided that this had to be a business-driven undertaking. It couldn't be it couldn't be about IT system replacement. It couldn't just be about IT solutions, that this had to be driven by the businesses. And that's easy to say, and that's a whole lot harder to do, because our businesses kind of looked at us and said, well, you guys, we're going to tell you at a high level what we want. You go and build it, come back to us with exactly what we said. And often what they said, as most of you know, was pretty high level. It might have been a 2 or 3 line descriptor, and it wasn't enough to go and start doing any sort of a reasonable build. So what we did with the business here is we really took a step back, and we forced the top level of decision making in Maybank to get their heads around what was going to be important to them. So you'll hear me refer to this group as the Maybank Exco. And just for clarity, that's the top 13 decision makers in the Maybank group. So it's the head of the retail business, head of the wholesale business, head of HR, head of risk, all the heads. And prior to that, they hadn't been too involved in IT period. When we started the IT transformation program, from the board through the CEO, and the CEO you met this morning, said all these key decision makers have to have a stake in this transformation. So we did something that didn't make us very popular at all. To come up with the essential advantages that are on the screen, we brought everybody in on a Saturday morning. So if you guys got invited to come in and do an IT workshop on a Saturday morning, would you be excited? Head shaking, and you guys like IT. You can just imagine what the executive of Maybank was thinking, that they got dragged in on a Saturday morning to talk about IT. But the first stage was getting people into an environment where the Blackberries weren't ringing, people weren't running off to meetings, they actually had nothing else going on, and they had to sit and focus on what this IT program was going to mean to the group. And we had breakout groups, we did brainstorming, we got their inputs. Now the challenging part for us was actually aligning on what the strategic imperatives were, the essential advantages. And why that was tough was because we're a big group. So Maybank Malaysia is the largest bank in the country. Maybank Singapore is the 4th largest bank in Singapore, about 5% market share. Maybank in Indonesia, it's called BII, is about 4.5% market share. In some of our other countries, we're 1% market share. So when you look at what strategically a bank needs when you're the market leader versus when you're 1% market share, they're very different. And getting people to align on what those strategic imperatives were, we found out it was a bit more challenging than we thought. So we really had to get people to start making some choices. And this is what they came up with. Is the first one is multi-channel sales and service, followed by integrated customer analytics, followed by agile manufacturing. Just to give you some insight, when we started the whole process, agile manufacturing actually came quite a bit higher because the business guys were saying, we need product, we need product, we need product. I need speed to market, I need 24/7, I need a lot of those capabilities. When we got a bit deeper into it and actually got the business heads who were responsible for P&L involved, they said, actually, I don't need agile manufacturing. What I need is multi-channel sales and service. We need to know that we have a consistency for all our customers, whether people are on MTU. You guys I'm going to ask you, you're going to have to get some exercise during this presentation. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands every once in a while. How many of you in here use internet banking? Can I see your hands? Okay, I'm going to ask a dangerous question. How many of you use Maybank's internet bank? Okay, that's a good answer. Well, most of you do. How many of you use ATMs or cash deposit machines? Okay, slightly less. How many of you go to any bank branch anymore? How many of you have been to a bank branch in the last 6 months? Can we see your hands? So you see the numbers falling off dramatically. The reason why we chose number 1 is because what customers were telling us in focus groups is you wanted your experience to be seamless. If you did something on the internet bank and then went into the branch and you had an issue, you didn't want to have to explain the story 5 times. You didn't want to get passed around to 3 different people. You expected Maybank to be up to speed on what you were doing. And as we see it going forward, getting seamless channels becomes very important. So that's why seamless or multi-channel customer sales and service came in. Integrated customer analytics is the next stage of figuring out what you want or what's going to be useful for you. And you guys are all familiar with CRM. For us, it's how do we really do it well. There's been a lot of CRM applications in the past. It's figuring out how we have something that's actually of use to customers. Customers are getting sick of being bombarded. They've been bombarded by spam, by telephone conversations, by many different approaches from financial institutions and non-financial institutions. Going forward, we're going to have to do this smarter. And lastly is agile product manufacturing. So we got the group to agree on this, and that was a major coup. It actually took 2 weekend sessions. The first one, we got input from them. The second one, we came back because we actually had a laundry list before we arrived at these top 3. So first lesson learned. When we first tried to do this, we tried to tack it on the end of an all-day meeting. So we tried to do it as one of the steering committees. People didn't engage. They just couldn't be bothered. They didn't want to really get into it. So first lesson that we learned a bit the hard way, if you have to make major decisions with senior decision makers, it is as unpopular as it is, we use the weekends. And we've done it again recently where we bring people in on a Sunday for the major decisions. The next thing we did was then, once we had that guidance from the senior decision makers, is to say, okay, what's our enterprise architecture? Now, you guys are all professionals, you've seen lots of enterprise architectures. It's a bank in a box or bank on a page. They don't differ that much. I mean, there's some slight variation. But the important thing we did with ours is established a target architecture which looked at business capabilities. So it wasn't just when we took the enterprise architecture and took it back to the business people, it was what does this mean to you from a business standpoint? So if you look at the chart, you can see it's a little tough to read, but what we've attempted to do in the boxes around the outside is to define what are the business capabilities and what's that going to bring to your customers. Because businesses, they don't want to hear the technical term. They don't want to hear the software replacement. Our businesses really wanted to know, what is this going to deliver to my business? And in turn, what will that mean to my customers? So that was another big pain point for us, because as an IT organization, we like to talk about solutions. We like to talk in technical terms. We weren't comfortable framing up our objectives and capabilities in a business language. As we started to get better at that, we found we had way better traction with the businesses. We found that finally we were having the right conversations. Now the second thing we did once we had that enterprise architecture is we created heat maps. And we basically took the as-is for each business unit. So up here is CFS, that's our Community Financial Services. We did it for retail, we did it for wholesale, we did it across geographic units. And we said, okay, if we take your current state versus the end state of enterprise architecture, where are you red, where are you yellow, and where are you green? So finally, the businesses started to see where the gaps were. And quite frankly, when we looked at that, because the enterprise architecture was going to take 5 to 6 years, on some of it we said we're going to have to do tactical solutions, on others you're going to have to wait for the longer term strategic. But finally the businesses had a bit better idea of where their gaps were, and they could start planning their business a bit different too. So what we mean by that is if you're in retail banking and you're looking for a capability, let's say on product bundling, and so that you can combine 2 or 3 products on a special offer. You need to know, is that going to happen next year, is that going to happen in 2 years or 3 years, because you're going to build it into your budgets. And you're going to be expected to have a certain increase in your sales based on that capability. Before, people never had more than a 12-month window. They knew what their list of projects was for the next year, but they didn't know 2, 3, 4 years, and they didn't know when certain capabilities were coming down the pipe. So this was the first stage to giving businesses some real visibility on what was going to come down the pipe. Now, that then translated into what we call our regional roadmaps. And they're quite colorful up here, but what you can see is for each country, we then took the enterprise architecture, and after a lot of discussions on timing, on prioritization, on who needed what when and who didn't need what when, we came up with the regional roadmaps. And this was the first time that Maybank as a group knew what major capabilities were going to be delivered to what countries when. Now the next slide puts it all in one slide. It's way too much data, but the point here is for the first time, really we had an idea of how it all came together. We've had to make changes, we've had to prioritize. We're actually right now at the midpoint in the program, taking a hard step back and looking at, okay, what have we delivered till now? How are we resequencing and reprioritizing till the end of the program based on the learnings? But when you have a roadmap to begin with, that makes that a lot easier. Now, you might be sitting and saying, well, everybody has a roadmap. The difference, I think, with this one is this map is bought into by the businesses. So the businesses actually have to plan their budgets, the businesses have to plan their resources, and the businesses have to report back to the board on how they're going to use the capabilities that are coming down the pipe with the roadmap. Okay? So ITTP, the transformation program. So this is what we've been living, breathing, sleeping, eating for the last 3.5 years. We've got our successes. So the first part was about building capability. We've launched four releases so far. We've got a number that are currently in detailed design, build, and implement. The 4 we've launched are regional branch solution, regional cash management, EDMS, enterprise document management, and obviously we've built a fair bit of infrastructure along the way. What I'll really draw your attention to here, and I know it's small, but up in the top left-hand corner, the regional branch solution. So this is our branch front end. So although only about half of you go into the branches, when you go into a Maybank branch, or for that matter, most banks in Malaysia, the first thing you do when you walk into a branch, for those of you who've been there, is what? Take a ticket, right? The second thing you do is then go over and you take out a slip and you start filling out the slip. I don't know, I'm seeing some people nodding their heads, they have to fill out the slip. Any of you enjoy filling out slips? I don't think there's a human being on earth that likes to fill out slips. Yet we make people fill out a slip for just about every transaction they do. So the first thing we did is said eliminate paper. People got to be able to walk into a branch and use their thumbprint or use their ID card to initiate their transaction. They don't have to fill out paper anymore. So the first one is get rid of the forms. The second one is what we call once and done. So if you've been a customer of Maybank for 10 to 12 years and we have all your data, if you want to buy a new product from us, guess what we make you do? Fill out another form. So no customer likes filling out another form, especially when you know that I have all your data in the computer. So if you've given us a full set of data, that's all you have. You only have to do it once. When you want to buy your next product, all we do is ask you if your address has changed, and then we print out a form, and the only pen to paper you do is your signature. And that's the way it should be. You shouldn't be filling out forms if you've had a relationship with an institution for any time. The third thing we cleaned up is remittances. If you wanted to send money overseas, it took you anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes every time you went into the branch. This transaction, if you're sending it to the same party, we can actually do it in 2 to 3 minutes. So we figured a major pain point for our branch operations. And the last one is home branch. How many of you have heard of the home branch? A few of you? If you started your relationship with one branch and you put an FD there, if you go into any of our other branches previously and you tried to uplift the FD, we'd say, can you please go back to your home branch? Most banks do that. No customer on earth likes to hear home branch, especially if they're not at their home branch, because that means they have to drive somewhere else. Going forward, there is no home branch. We can do it for you at any one of our 400 branches, which is the way it should be. Now, I go through a bit of detail here because what I didn't tell you is what technology solution we're using. I didn't tell you about who our vendor was. I didn't tell you about any of the performance. What we have really taken a lot of pain to do is frame the program from a customer angle and from a business angle on how things get better for customers, on how things get better for the business, and how things get better for staff. The technical solution side, that all takes care of itself. That's our job to deal with, the IT side. What we had to do with each of our releases is have a almost fanatical focus on what are the business benefits going to be. Because it's very easy to slip into doing system replacements, as most of you are aware. So these charts here, these are the posters we have all over the bank in terms of how we're driving the system or how we're driving the transformation program. So I just used the retail RBS as the example. We're at about somewhere between 150 to 200 branches. By the year end, we'll be at all branches nationwide, and you should be able to go into any Maybank and you no longer fill out forms. So it should change the way customers deal, because for the first time you'll walk in, the queues are going to be a lot shorter, you don't have to fill out forms, your banking experience gets a lot better. But every single capability we do should be aimed at making a very different customer experience, either for our end customers or our internal customers. Now, I talked a bit about benefits. Our board, because we're making material investments, is quite fanatical about making sure that before we start to spend one single ringgit, that we're looking at what is the business benefit we're going to get. And we have hard and we have soft benefits. And what we do here, and this is one of our learning points, and we learned it from a few banks we visited in the region. Key here is to get the business to basically sign in blood before you start the project. Is we do an IT project plan, the business has to do a benefits plan. They have to say, with this new capability, how am I going to raise my revenue? How am I going to reduce costs on the intangibles? How am I going to get service levels better? How am I going to reduce error ratios? And all those have to be committed in hard targets. And basically you have to put up a business case that generates the hurdle rate on the ROI and the other key financial indicators for the group. And then once we've done that, once the businesses have signed up for that, then they get held accountable. So it's not just about delivering a system, it's then really about delivering the business benefits that go afterwards. So on this one, and I'll talk a bit later on the governance, but on this one, the business IT partnership right from the beginning is critical, from even the start of the business case, because it's the business that has to be held accountable for the benefits way beyond the delivery of the actual physical handover of the new system. So that was another key learning point, because the first one or two, we didn't get the businesses involved early enough. When we did get the businesses involved, already we had fairly large budgets, and the businesses were saying, well, you guys stuck me with this budget. I'm now just manufacturing a business case to do this. So the learning is get business involved early and make sure that the business owns the business case. The next area, and I kind of touched on this, is governance. And for I think any major program, the minute you get into material spend, people will talk about the governance and they'll say your motherhood statement is governance, governance, governance. For us, a local institution maybe didn't have the best governance, and we're not bad, but we're not great. Putting in place the world-class governance has made a big deal. And I think in our experience, governance can be one of two things. Governance can be this massive bureaucracy, red tape, hurdles that people have to jump through to get any investment dollars. Or governance can be a process that makes sure parties have to align, have to agree, everything is transparent, so that any decisions made will survive one or two people. Because in the past we'd have some pretty powerful people who would make a decision, and this decision was made by that person or that person. And if that person wasn't there, you had a lot of people saying, well, that was their project, I never agreed with it to begin with, we can undo it. One of the things we aim to do is to have decisions, and this will strike you as a bit odd, we aim to have decisions that were made by committees. And the reason being, if we're spending 300 or 400 million ringgit on a capability, if one person leaves the bank, that capability has to survive. And what we want to do is make sure that we institutionalize the decision process, so that if it got challenged 3 or 4 years down the line, everybody had a stake in it, everybody had gone through a painful process, and the right people would be able to stand up for the decision-making process. So we put in place a very robust decision-making process that integrated it really from right down from the bottom is RSC, that's our release steering committees, through our IT steering committee, through our group IT steering committee and our group procurement committee, and then of course up to the board. And the one last thing I'd say is if you're doing material spend, so anything that gets up there, is we engage the board very heavy right from the beginning. So at one point we were going to the board of directors every single month to have an update, because with a program of any material size, you guys know what it's like. There will be very challenging phases in the program. And if the board hasn't bought in, and if the board isn't aligned, that's when programs like this get cut, is when boards start saying, economies have changed, we never really believed in this, let's cut it. What happened with us is when we got into some tough, when the economy started to get a bit slower, our board was exactly the opposite. Because they'd been part of the process, it was how can we accelerate the delivery of these capabilities that are going to make a difference to the group. You need to cut other places. You may need to cut somebody or run the bank capability, but in terms of building your strategic capability, if you've aligned your board, they'll pull you through the tough parts. On this one, this is about selected processes. And the mistake we made here is so the first couple of releases that we did, we were very hands-on, the project management team was hands-on, we were in all the details, and then we started to launch more and more releases. And we kind of made a bit of an erroneous assumption to assume that all the other releases would follow the learnings of the first 2 or 3 releases. That doesn't happen by osmosis. That doesn't happen even though a lot of the people have been sitting in the room in the meetings, is you have to put in place, as you well know, the methodologies and mechanisms to force that to happen. And for us, getting scale and making sure that we didn't make the same mistake twice was about a lot of this. So you can see the capabilities there, but we just couldn't take it for granted that even if a number of the same people had gone through it, that didn't mean that you were going to get the robust methodology that you'd had on the previous ones. So for us, from a Maybank standpoint, embedding this into the group and making it part of the way of life is critical. And in some cases, we're still not there. It's a work in progress. Now, the monitoring, there's different ways to monitor. You can have, here are some of our dashboards and some of our risk matrix. I think from our standpoint, there's 2 critical things. Is from a monitoring standpoint at a very high level, less is probably better than more. Is if you have 8 to 10 pages of dashboards, nobody looks at it. If you have a 1-page dashboard that all senior management can see and they know whether a project's online or not, that's critical. And when we go up to the board, we are encouraged very strongly to be as candid as possible. If a project was over budget, you show the project's over budget. If you're concerned about timelines, indicate that as early as possible. No surprises to the board. So we designed our templates to let people know in advance, because we in this type of project, we hate surprises. Surprises usually indicate that something's getting as bad and will only get worse. So we've always, so that leads to the second part on the risk matrix. We put in place risk mechanisms that forced projects to declare their risks early. Projects got penalized if they declared risks too late. If they declared their risks early, we could usually get on top of it, get the resources there, get the alignment, get the hurdles out of the way to get the project back online. If you left it too late, as you guys know, it didn't work. But in our culture, and so I'll be candid with you, in the Maybank culture, before this, a lot of times when there was issues, most people would try and suppress it. They'd keep it at this level. They'd try and solve it inside here. They'd try and take care of it because nobody liked to look bad at a senior level. So we had to change that culture. Changing that culture was material, so people realized if there's a problem, don't suppress it. Don't keep it under the carpet. Get it up earlier so you can get the help. So that was a big cultural shift for our bank and our group. And still, every new project, we have to go through that cultural shift again. Now, in terms of capabilities that we're building, we work with some major system integrator partners, most of you would know. We're looking at how do we build our in-house capabilities so we don't have to rely on external parties forever. As you know, I hope none of you are system integrators here, but you probably are. The system integrators are expensive. We can't afford to be becoming reliant on the system integrators over the long term. So we're building internal capabilities, we're developing talent, and this is with an aim to cost reduction. So these are the motherhood statements I talked about. The challenges we're facing is we weren't able to build that capability as fast as possible. So our intention with, I told you about the branch solution. Our intention was we'd work with our system integrator on that one. They'd lead us through the process. Then when we went to our next release, they would take a back seat and monitor us, and we would actually do the build. When we got to our second release, we just found we weren't ready. There was no way we could take on the lead role for the build, and we had to get them in there. So I think on that one, the recruitment, making sure we had the right skills, and making sure we had very tangible measures of how quickly our people were getting skills was critical. If you just put people on a project together and you're not testing and you're not measuring how fast they're coming up the curve, and what you'll find is you go to the next release and you're still not ready. And from our system integrator standpoint, they're all right with that because they'd like you to keep them on as long as possible. So on this one, we've had to pledge that we're building this with MDEC because we're now an MSC status company. And for a lot of what we're trying to do is build that capability within so that we're not so reliant, and that one's not easy. So maybe as I wrap up here, lessons learned. Every single presentation I've ever seen talks about close partnership between IT and business. It's very easy to say and it's very tough to do. Where we see it working quite well, our IT and our business are hand in hand, and business doesn't think about very much without calling IT to say, hey, we need your opinion on this. We want you to be our partner. Where it's not, we're still using the mechanisms to try and force the business and IT to go through a more rigorous planning. The second point up there, and we did this, it was a bit different, is we engaged a third-party quality assurance partner. So most IT programs, when they bring in the third party, you know when they bring in the third-party quality assurance? When the program's fallen off the rails. They're already pretty deep. They're either over on scope, they're under on scope, they're over on budget, they're over on timeline, and they bring in a third party to tell them what went wrong. At the request of our board, we actually did it at the very beginning of the program. We brought in a third party that reports directly to the board, and they go to the board and they say what's going well, what's not going well, and what does this program need to look out for the next 6 months. So I got to tell you, for the first 3 to 4 times we went to the board with this third-party quality assurance partner, it was pretty stressful because they were basically pointing out all the mistakes that we were making, and that was their job. So the board was obviously eating it up. And what we found, though, is as we started to work with the QA partner, we could avoid a lot of mistakes. Because once you're inside the program, your reality is too close to your face. The QA partner coming in on a quarterly basis really helped us to see where we were making some more strategic mistakes that we could head off before we got there. So it's fairly unorthodox to bring them in way in advance. But we're now to the point where the board of directors is saying, do you still need the QA partner? Have you built that capability to the point now? Because the QA partner, you guys, by the third year, you should be able to highlight where the deficiencies are and the gaps are. And we don't even possibly need a QA partner going forward. And that's good news, because usually a third year in the program is when you're bringing in the QA partner because you've fallen off the rails. So that was a bit of a different move that has, for us, paid off in spades. A bit of pain at the beginning of the process, but really wrapped it around. So maybe I'll just wrap up by saying where we are now is July 1st, we operationalized Maybank Shared Services, which is our shared service company. We injected all the IT, the build, the run, and the governance or parts of the governance into our Maybank Shared Services. It's an MSC status company. And we're pretty excited because this is really about a Malaysian institution that's building a regional capability. So this will serve our Singapore, our Philippines, our Indonesia, some of our other capabilities. And one of the reasons we're an MSC company is we're one of the first that's really building a Malaysian-centric financial services capability that will go to the region. So our hope is that we build capability. We're able to create a center of excellence here that we can serve on a cost-efficient basis to the rest of the region and really stand out as an example for other companies to follow going forward. So with that, I'll wind up and take any questions. You guys still awake? Sure, in the back. I'll caveat this by saying if you ask very technical questions, my colleague in the front row may answer them.
Sorry, forgive me if I, for my ignorance, if I say something, I'll ask wrong question.
Sure.
So today is this conference talk about software testing.
Yep.
So I'd like to find out whether, just now you mentioned you have third-party quality assurance partner. Is this group of people is a software tester or system analysis, for example? And do you have internal software tester to do your, testing? These are my two questions. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. Good questions. Sorry, I wasn't too clear on that. Our third-party quality assurance partner is actually more at a strategic level. So they evaluate whether the program is achieving their strategic objectives, and at a strategic and a high-level execution level, what issues we may be facing. Our testing capability is now joint. I mean, we work with our system integrators as well as our in-house capability. We had some testing capability before. It's one of it, if I go back here, where one of the things is we're looking to do is build a testing center of excellence. So I think one of the speakers before mentioned, it might have been you that asked, how do you train testers? And one of the speakers said you practice, practice, and practice. So with us, we're putting in place the structure and we're building up a testing capability. And you guys are far more experts than I am on this. This is just a build process that takes some time. So in the interim period, we will have to rely on some external parties to augment us on that one. The intention is we have our own internal capability that can serve the group within a 2 to 3 year time frame, but that's not something that we're building in 2 to 3 months. It's more 2 or 3 years. Good question. Anyone else? Sure.
You said you had a governance process that required approval levels at various levels of spending. One of the things that we've seen with some of our clients is that can get pretty ossified, and you get a lot of conservatism in there, and you start having to kick up to pretty high levels for approval of fairly minimal amounts. Can you talk about how you sort of balance the need to be flexible and responsive against the need to have adequate oversight for your spending?
Sure, great comment. I'll set a bit of context. Maybank loves governance. Maybank loves committees. And to your point, it's very easy to get caught up in form over substance. So substance is, at the end of the day, we want to make the best decision for the group with as much visibility on the facts as possible. Form is taking forever and ever to arrive at a decision because people ask for this requirement and we have this requirement. Let's postpone the decision for another 2 weeks because we need this requirement. So at a working level, it was finding that, as you put, striking that balance between getting enough objective and accurate data to make decisions and not analysis to paralysis. And what we found is because some of these decisions were on dollar amounts that were bigger than any of these people had made before, the inclination was to get more data and more data and more data. So one of the things is we put timelines, and we stuck to our timelines, but having enough courage to say if you didn't have the right data, even though the timeline said you're supposed to be making a decision, leadership had to step up and say, guys, we're not forcing a decision to hit the timeline if we don't have the data to make the decision. The second thing was getting that balance between, let's say, your board of directors and your executive level committee. And at the beginning, we went up to the board a lot, so the board wanted a lot of visibility. As they've gotten more confidence, we're starting to push more and more decision making down to a management level. But I think for a program of a large size, it's a bit of a credibility build at the beginning. You have to get the credibility, and the board has to know that you're making robust decisions with the right data, and you're really navigating correctly. And once your board sees that and your QA partner validates that, and they get some confidence and comfort, then they're going to start pushing the decision making down. So a bit of a process on that one for us as well. Thanks for the question. Maybe one last one. Okay, with that, thank you very much.